Hello everyone, my name is Ian, you're watching Big Rock Moto, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Let me take you back in time and tell you just a very quick story. Let me take you back to the year 2000, if you can remember that. That was 22 years ago. I was a sophomore in high school, if you can believe that, and Suzuki had just introduced the DR-Z400. This bike here, even though it's a 2022 model year, is not all that much different than the bike that was released over 22 years ago. Over those 22 years, the DR-Z has deservedly built a reputation as being a reliable, practical, relatively comfortable, good performing dual sport bike at a price that most people could afford, and it doesn't require too much maintenance. One of the points that I'm going to make as we go through the video today is that this bike really doesn't have any direct competition, because if you think about it, you have bikes like Honda's CRF300L, the Kawasaki KLX300, Yamaha XT250, bikes like that, a lot of which I've tested and which I have reviews here on the channel. And then you go up to bikes like KTM's 350 and 500 EXCs, a Beta 500 RRS like I own, a Husky FE 501S, or even Honda's CRF 450 RL, but those bikes are a lot more expensive, much more of a race level performance, and require a lot more maintenance. And if you want something in between those two categories, the DR-Z is pretty much the only mainstream bike that offers that. However, with all that being said, there's a few factors that really keep this bike from being the perfect dual sport for so many people. And I think these three reasons are reasons why a lot of people end up owning these bikes and then selling them and moving on to something else. And those three factors are: it uses a carburetor instead of fuel injection, it has an extremely tall seat height at over 37 inches, and it has a close ratio 5-speed transmission, which really limits your gearing options for if you want to travel at low speed on the trail and then at high speed on the highway. But even with those limitations in mind, there's a lot of reasons why you might still choose a DR-Z even today in 2022 when I'm filming this review. So here's how I'm going to break down this video for you today. It's going to be a little bit shorter than most of my videos just because there's so much content already out there on the DR-Z and we don't need to rehash a lot of the same topics in depth. So I'm going to take you on a tour around the bike, talk about its specs and features. We're going to get it out on a highway, show its performance. We're going to get it in the dirt and show its performance there off-road. Then we're going to come back here and talk a little bit about why you would choose this or not choose it versus its competitors in both of those categories, from the lower end and the higher end, and then we'll close out with some final thoughts. So with that being said, let's go for a ride. All right, here we go. Let's talk about some of the features and specs of this bike, and then we'll get it out on the highway and get it out on the trails. So why don't we start with the heart of the beast, which is the engine. It's been around forever, obviously. It's Suzuki's 398cc liquid-cooled double overhead cam single-cylinder engine, and it's proven to be a pretty reliable engine for Suzuki, as you would expect from a company like Suzuki. So this engine puts out about 39 horsepower at the crank, around 29 foot-pounds of torque, again at the crank, and then it's got a compression ratio of 11.3 to 1. Let's look at some of the other specs of the bike. So you're looking at around a 2.5 gallon fuel tank. That's a very popular aftermarket upgrade for people to put on a larger tank, which is easier to do. So you probably have around 100-mile range or so, depending on how fast you're riding. The carburetor, which is buried underneath in here, is a Mikuni BSR 36. And as we're going to talk about throughout this review, this is one of the last remaining new motorcycles sold today with a carburetor instead of fuel injection. The DR-Z uses a 5-speed transmission, which is one thing that definitely holds this bike back and really shows the age of this bike compared to some of its more modern competition. We'll talk about why that 5-speed is kind of a drawback when we go out and ride this thing. We're looking at some really beefy suspension on the DR-Z. It was really impressive 20 years ago when this bike came out, and it's actually still pretty decent today if you compare it to a lot of other more budget-oriented dual sports on the market. I recently tested bikes like the CRF300L and the KLX300, and this suspension blows those out of the water. So what you have is a 49mm front fork with full adjustments, rebound compression, and preload, and it has around 11.5 inches of travel. It is a conventional fork, not an upside down fork. The rear shock also has around 11.5 inches of travel, so that much travel puts it up more competitive with the race level dual sport bikes like a KTM EXC or something like that.
as opposed to the 9 or 10 inches of travel you're getting out of a bike like a KLX or a CRF, or even less with some other bikes in that category. You've got 21-inch front wheel and an 18-inch rear wheel. You've got over 11 inches of ground clearance, which is very, very impressive, very good for navigating the trails. And the seat is a towering skyscraper-like 37 inches. You notice when you walk up to the bike, it's like the seat is above my waist. It's almost up to my belly button, and I'm not a short person. I'm 5'11". There's two more specs we should talk about on the DR-Z. Let's talk about the weight. So the wet weight of this bike, fully fueled up as it sits, is around 317 pounds. I've seen some publications measure it around 320 pounds, but 317, give or take a few pounds, I think is pretty accurate. The other thing is the pricing. So for 2022, I know the bike has gone up in price slightly over the years due to inflation. For 22, this comes in at $6,999 US plus freight, and I think there's like a destination surcharge or something, and that's one of the recent things that's been a casualty of COVID and all the supply issues going on, is that prices have gone up just a little bit. Let's take a quick tour around the bike so you can see that it still has a halogen headlight. You know, that'd be one thing if they ever updated the bike, that would be to give it an LED. They've got these incandescent turn signals with the clear lenses. You can see the square type mirrors here. Non-adjustable levers. You don't have any adjustments for the reach of the levers there. Looking at the forks, you've got the big fork gators. You've got these Bridgestone trail wing tires, which are more of a street tire. They don't give you a lot of grip off-road. Working our way around this way, you can see the radiator here. A radiator is actually a split radiator, so you've got one on each side. You've got these radiator shrouds. You can see the bike does not come with a skid plate. It comes with this tiny little thing here, but if you're going to go off-road, you're going to want to put a real skid plate on it. This little piece of plastic here, I guess, to protect the water pump. You can see the header pipe here. Fuel tank, side panels. This is some adjustments for your rear shock. Passenger foot pegs. The driver foot pegs are very, very small, and they have this rubber insert, which I believe you can remove with the bolt, which you'd want to do if you're riding off-road because it'd be too slippery. Very, very small foot peg. Brake lever with a little folding tip there. You can see here the real beefy rear swing arm, the rear 18-inch tire, single piston front brake. Rear brake. I forgot to mention the front brake is a dual piston with a 250 millimeter rotor, and I believe the back is a 220 millimeter rotor. They're tube type tires, definitely not going to get tubeless tires on a bike like this. You can see the standard exhaust can here. Tool pouch, big old rear fender. A lot of people, when they're modifying this bike, put on what they call a tail tidy to sort of get rid of this huge thing hanging off the back here and this big kind of ugly tail light. But again, they have to meet vehicle code requirements to make it legal. This thing pops off here with these three fasteners. I believe they call these Zeus fasteners. They just quick turn, and your air filter is going to be under there. Final drive. Let's see what else we've got. Shift lever here, which you can obviously adjust, and you can see some of the fuel lines and things to the carburetor. You also have this fuel. What is this here? This is probably the fuel canister. Yeah, so it's an evaporation canister for California emissions requirements. Coming up here to the dashboard and the controls, you've got these kind of off-road motocross style grips. You've got very kind of old looking switch gear. The turn signals are not self-canceling, obviously. Horn button there. You can see you've got the key. It's got 3 positions. Then the other key is for the steering lock, which is a separate lock down inside here. And then in terms of the dashboard, you've got a water temperature light, high beam indication light, a neutral light, turn signal light, and then you've got different functions you can scroll through here. So trip A, odometer, trip B. You can do timers, you can do a clock. You can set this up, and you can also adjust this if you change tires or wheel sizes. You can adjust the computer to account for that. So kind of some cool stuff there. I appreciate the pretty comprehensive dashboard there, although you don't get things like a fuel gauge or a gear position indicator. Some of the things that I really liked about that Honda CRF300 I just did, you don't get here. Another interesting thing about the DR-Z is that it's a dry sump oil lubrication system. So without going into all that, basically you have oil running through the frame, and when you check your oil or changing your oil, you've got an oil dipstick up here as well as down here. So it's a interesting system which you don't see too much on modern motorcycles.
Are you going to read the commercial for Daddy? Are you going to do the Keeps commercial? No? Okay, then I guess I better do it. A huge thank you to Keeps for sponsoring today's video. So as many of you have thoughtfully pointed out in the comments section of my videos, over the past year or two, my hair has slowly been receding. Thankfully, no one has made a time lapse yet. Well, thankfully, Keeps is an online subscription service that helps men like me keep more of their hair. Here's some facts about hair loss. 2 out of 3 men will experience hair loss by the time they're 35, and trust me, I'm definitely living proof of that. Keeps offers clinically proven, research-backed treatments to help slow hair loss. With Keeps, you can get quality expert care without ever visiting a doctor's office. All of Keeps' doctors' recommended treatment plans are delivered straight to your door at about half the price of a traditional pharmacy. Keeps has you covered whether you're just looking to slow hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or just take better care of the hair you still have. Also, in addition to their clinically proven treatments, Keeps has an award-winning thickening shampoo and conditioner. Keeps physicians will be able to help you select the right treatment for your conditions and your specific goals. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, please go to keeps.com/BigRockMoto or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/BigRockMoto. Thanks again to Keeps for sponsoring today's video.
Okay, let's jump on board the DR-Z and go for a ride. So, one of the first things that I notice when I get on this bike is the seat is incredibly tall. I mean, I'm used to riding tall bikes, but I'm 5'11", almost 6 feet tall, and I'm on my tiptoes. I cannot flat foot this bike. Very, very tall motorcycle. That's a factor of having a lot of suspension travel and a lot of ground clearance, which is good off-road, but if you're anything under 5'10", this bike is going to feel super tall for you. Oh look, unlike the DR-Z400S, they didn't put the brake line right in front of the dashboard. So the other thing you're going to notice is that the motorcycle has a fuel valve to turn off and on and reserve, and a choke because it's carbureted. In 2022, it's just crazy to see a carburetor. So what that means is that starting it up in cold weather or different altitudes can be a little bit tricky sometimes, because sometimes it wants choke, sometimes it doesn't want choke. What I found that at my altitude, it's 6,000 feet above sea level, the chokes it down too much. So I actually start it without the choke. So carbureted bikes like to be warmed up just a little bit because sometimes they tend to be a little bit cold-blooded. So there's no tachometer on the DR-Z, that's one thing you're going to notice. Okay, let's get going on the DR-Z. One of the other first things I notice is that, aside from feeling like I'm way up high in the air, is that the gearing is really tall. So unlike the CRF300 I just got off of, done testing, this bike has a really tall first gear, which we're going to get into because, oh shit, I stalled it. See, first gear is really tall, and it's not very good for trail riding unless you lower the gearing, but then when you lower the gearing is not tall enough for the highway. Now, it has been a while since I've been on the DR-Z, and I've forgotten a lot of the things that I really liked about it. So I've owned 2 of these bikes. I've owned 2 DR-Zs. I really have loved them, enjoyed them. They've served me very well. I find it to be just a very good dual sport motorcycle for any kind of dual sporting that you want to do. One thing that can be kind of nice about having a carburetor is the power comes on really, really smooth, so you don't have any like jerky fueling or anything. Carburetors can deliver some pretty nice smooth fueling. The other thing about this bike is it has pretty decent power. Yeah, I mean, you can blast up to 70 pretty quick. This thing has so much more power than like that Honda 300 I just got off of, or the KLX 300, or any of those like 250 to 300 kind of dual sport bikes. All right, let's get after it a little bit. So on a twisty road, I kind of forgot how much fun a dual sport like this is. with more street tires. I've never really ridden a DR-Z with these kind of tires. I've always had knobbies when I had my DR-Zs. This thing, you know, 40 horsepower, it's enough to be fun. You can really chuck it through some twisties and have a really good time. It's on a whole nother level of power from the CRF300 I just got off of. And that's something you really need to consider if you're shopping between these bikes. You know, this has so much more power than those 250s and 300s. It's no slouch, even in stock form. So then cruising on the highway at 60 miles an hour indicated, or around 100 kilometers an hour. I don't know what my RPM is, but the engine already feels pretty busy. And keep in mind, this is with the transmission that doesn't really have a low enough gearing for doing trails as it is in stock form. And it's 65, yeah, 65 indicated. Let's push it up to 70. Now at least it has the power to go 70 uphill and still accelerate up to 80 or 90, unlike the Honda 300 I just tested. There's quite a bit of vibration. It's not the smoothest thing around, and it's not going to be something that's really good for long distance touring. But if you just need to do 100 miles of highway or something to get between trails, like on a backcountry discovery route, a BDR, the DR-Z is still a great bike for that kind of thing. But you're going to have to pick a gearing that's a compromise between on and off road, that's for sure. Surprisingly, the mirrors work pretty well. They give a pretty good clear picture. The brakes, now there's no ABS, so whoa, I just slid the rear there. You got to be careful. But the brakes are pretty good. I would say they're okay, they're adequate. I think if you had a passenger and a bunch of luggage, I think the brakes would start to feel not so great. Okay, let's do a couple 0 to 70 mile per hour pulls. That's not bad. You know what? That's not slow. The DR-Z is not slow. Let's do one more for good measure here. Yeah, it's got plenty of acceleration to keep up with traffic or merge onto the freeway. So that's a really good thing about this bike. Okay, it's time to hit some dirt. So let's see how this DR-Z feels here. Oh, I forgot how much fun these bikes are. Let's hit some bumps on purpose. Whoa, okay, these are not knobby tires. Have to remember that. I forgot how decent the suspension is on these DR-Zs. What I like about the suspension is there's a lot of travel there, over 11 inches, and it allows it to be very plush. So this is a comfortable bike to ride off-road all day. And it's not, you know, you're not going to like do a lot of jumps or super fast riding because it is a little soft for that, but I really like the suspension on the DR-Z. It's always suited the way that I like to ride off-road. I like to sit down a lot just to save energy, and really enjoy the suspension. You can ride this bike pretty quick. I'm definitely being limited by the tires right now. I can feel them slipping all over the place, and I really don't want to get hurt again. I got hurt last week during filming. If you watch the Honda 300 review, like that little dip I just hit right there, that would have been a big bottom out on the Honda, but this bike takes it like an absolute champ. This is really fun. I forgot how good the DR-Z was. Dude, this thing is legit. I can't believe that after 22 years, still this good. That was a pretty big G out there, and I almost bottomed, but okay, I bottomed that, but I should be standing up during this. It's just easier to film, and you get a better angle on filming if I stay seated. Okay, so one of the only things I don't like about this bike is the gearing, and I know I sound like a dead horse, but let me show you what I mean. So first gear goes all the way up to 35 miles per hour. It doesn't allow you to really crawl along. It wants to stall too easily. The gearing's too tall for really slow technical trail work. It needs a lower first and second gear, and that's the problem. So I'm not on a technical trail right now, and it's kind of a long distance for me to get to that. But I can show you, like, through some of this stuff here, like these moguls and stuff. I mean, it does it, but it just, you know, you have to go faster than you might want. It just doesn't have the, you know, the low speed crawl ratio. So what everybody does is they lower the gearing, but then when you do that, you make it even buzzier on the highway, you know. But even with all that said, I still have a hell of a lot of fun riding this bike around. Why don't we leave the sort of the moto vlog portion at that, and then why don't we get back to the driveway, talk about kind of how this stacks up to what you would compare it to. So the cheaper dual sports, the more affordable dual sports, 250s and the 300s. Then we'll talk about, you know, why would you upgrade from this to like a Husky 500 or 350, or a KTM 350 or 500, or a CRF 450 RL bike like that. But really, this bike is very unique because it sits at a price point and a level of performance that it doesn't have any competitors. So you just don't have much choice if you want something exactly like this. So let's head back to the shop.
All right, I hope you guys enjoyed going along for that ride with me. Now, let's talk about how this stacks up against some of its competitors and why you might choose it. So, first of all, I know a lot of you are going to say, well, this is really a bike that you're going to buy used, because there's 22 years of these out there on the used market, right? All the way since year 2000, and that's true. So a lot of people are going to look at this as a used motorcycle. There's a lot of good ones with low miles, with some good accessories on them that you can get for a really good price. And that's honestly really the best way to buy a bike like this. However, if you are considering and really shopping, cross-shopping all the brand new dual sports right now and you want a brand new bike, there's a couple different competitors you'd look at. On the lower end, you'd look at bikes like Kawasaki's KLX 300 and Honda CRF 300L. And on the higher end, you're going to be looking at something like a KTM 500 EXC, maybe even a 690 Enduro, and Honda's CRF 450 RL. What I want to talk about are 6 main differences and ways this bike is set apart from all those competitors. And those 6 things would be carburetor versus fuel injection. The second thing is going to be the cost. The third thing is going to be the power. The fourth thing is going to be the maintenance requirements. The fifth item is the transmission. And the sixth item is the suspension. Okay, item number 1, carburation versus fuel injection. So pretty much everything else has moved on to fuel injection. So what are the ups and downs of a carburetor? Well, the upside is some people think that, you know, you can repair them like more in third world countries as opposed to fuel injection. You can tune them, you can change the jets, change the fueling to make it run differently. The downsides would be that it's a little bit more fidgety to work on. It also can, sometimes in the cold or hot weather or different altitudes, you can have issues starting it. It doesn't like to run as good at different altitudes. It doesn't have a built-in compensation method as well as fuel injection does. Overall, I just find fuel injection to be simpler, more reliable, and just make for a smoother, better running bike that gets better miles per gallon. That's just my opinion. Some people still like carburetors, but we'll leave it at that. Second item is cost. So this bike comes in around $7,000. So that's quite a bit more. Honda CRF300L comes in at I think $5,250. So this is about $1,800 more than that. So what are you getting versus a bike at that level? Well, you're getting a lot better suspension, you're getting a lot more power, you're getting a lot more torque, you're getting more ground clearance, you're getting more capability as a dual sport bike if you want to ride it aggressively. Now, how does the cost compare to the next level up? So the next level up is probably going to be Honda's CRF450RL. With that bike, you get more power, you get a 6-speed transmission, you get better suspension, better overall performance, a much more modern chassis and design, more modern features. So it's a higher performing bike, but that bike costs $10,000 or $11,000 brand new. So that's a huge increase, like a 40 or 50% increase over this bike. Let's talk about power. So the difference in power between this and the 250 or 300 class dual sport is dramatic. So the last dual sport I tested, actually the last bike I rode a few days ago, was Honda's CRF300L, which I know I keep bringing up in this video, but it's just a natural thing that I'm comparing it to. So this bike has so much more power and torque, it's immediately noticeable from the first time you pull away on it. This bike can legitimately sit at 65, 70 miles per hour or 100 to 110 kilometers per hour and still have enough power to accelerate up 20 or 30 miles an hour beyond that to make passes on the highway, pass semi-trucks, or just to compensate for the extra weight of luggage and a passenger, touring, things like that. So this bike legitimately has power for the highway where those 250s and 300s really struggle, in my opinion. Now at around 39 horsepower, it has 5, 10, 15, in some cases 20, maybe less horsepower than those higher performance bikes, a KTM 500, Honda CRF450RL. But this bike is decent. It's no slouch, as I showed in the acceleration runs, and you can do a lot of modifications if you really want this to go faster. So I don't think power is going to be a huge limiting factor on this bike. I think the decision to go with those higher end bikes is going to be more to do with suspension and overall less weight and performance and things like that. Let's talk about maintenance requirements. So the maintenance on this bike is more like a street motorcycle engine. So they recommend, I think, 3,000 mile oil change interval. The valve adjustment interval is recommended at 15,000 miles, which is really long. So you're doing a lot less maintenance on this compared to those race level dual sports. So that puts it in line with more like the 250 and 300 dual sports that are based off a street bike engine. Item number 5 that makes this difference is the transmission. So with only having a 5-speed close ratio gearbox, and I kind of tried to show this when I was riding, but it's very limiting in terms of the gear spread you have. So here's what I mean. The stock gearing is pretty good on the highway. You can cruise at 60 to 70 miles per hour. It doesn't feel too buzzy or like the engine's gonna blow up. But on the trail, you saw that first gear takes you over 30 miles an hour. It just doesn't have the correct gearing for doing any sorts of technical single track riding whatsoever. So you'd have to lower the gearing down. And when you do that, when you drop the gearing, and I know this because I did this on my DR-Zs, both the DR-Zs I had, then anything above 55 on the highway just feels absolutely horrendous. So it doesn't have enough gear spread to go different speeds. And that's really why a lot of people have moved on to other motorcycles after owning DR-Zs. The 6th item I mentioned was the suspension. So the suspension on this is really good and better than some people give it credit for. The spring rates are not too bad. It's probably sprung for around 160, 170 pound rider riding at a moderate pace. But as you saw, I could ride it pretty quick and I wasn't bottoming it too bad. The forks in particular feel really good to me. I was bottoming out a little bit more in the back shock through some of the G-outs, but it has really good adjustments. It supports the bike really well, it has a lot of travel, so you can ride really aggressively in a way that you cannot ride aggressively like that at all on those budget dual sport bikes. Now, is it up to the level of the race level dual sports? No, definitely not. But it's very good, and I think a lot of people would be happy with the stock and not have to do a bunch of expensive modifications to the suspension. Now I'm going to add a 7th category, which I forgot to put in my notes here, but that's the weight. So weight is a really big deal. This bike weighs almost 320 pounds. That's 70 more pounds than the dual sport that I own personally, the Beta 500 RRS. And that's one of the reasons why I paid extra money to get that bike instead of the DR-Z. I was having DR-Zs before. 70 pounds is a lot of weight. That's a big weight difference. So the weight is definitely a factor, and if you want the lighter weight bike, you're going to pay for it in terms of the higher price and the higher maintenance. Final thoughts on Suzuki's DR-Z400S. I think the question is, should you still be considering this alongside other more modern alternatives? And I think the answer is a huge yes and a huge 2 thumbs up for me, because it offers a lot of capability for the money. As I mentioned, there's a ton of examples on the used market, but even as a new motorcycle, it still represents a very good value for the performance that you get. There's a huge amount of aftermarket for this motorcycle. You can customize it into any way you want. You can turn it into a single track machine, although it's going to be a little bit heavy. You can turn it into more of an adventure touring bike by putting pannier racks on it and luggage and go tackle whatever long distance off-road ride you want to do. You can even carry a passenger. There's people that carry passengers on these bikes. So it's a very versatile platform, and it's still very unique because, like I said, it really doesn't have any direct competition. All that being said, you do have to realize the limitations of this bike, and I've covered that in this video. The really tall seat. Now, yes, you can lower the bike, you can get a lower seat, but you're still starting off at 37 inches high, which is extremely high. So that's going to be a limitation for a lot of people. The five-speed gearbox is going to be a limitation for a lot of people. And I think, based on a lot of people I've talked to and a lot of the comments I've read, that a carburetor is kind of a limiting factor for some people. They really don't want that anymore. But if you can live with those things, then this is still an amazing dual sport bike, even after all these years. Now, trust me, all of us, and I mean everybody, every rider I've talked to out there, even people who work at Suzuki, they want Suzuki to update this bike, give it a 6-speed wide ratio transmission, give it fuel injection, and I would ask that they maybe lower the seat at least down to like a 35-inch seat height or something like that. If they could do that and maintain the relatively affordable cost, the reliability, and the low maintenance requirements, this would be an absolute unicorn, game-changer dual sport bike. It would totally transform it, and it would have no competition, and they would potentially make a lot of money and sell a lot of them. So I'm not sure why Suzuki hasn't done that, but Suzuki, if you're listening, that's what you need to do. That's the motorcycle that does not exist right now in the dual sport world. So please make it, and we will come. I will be first in line. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. I hope it was useful. Please support Big Rock Moto, and there's all the ways to do that down in the description below. Other than that, I'm gonna just leave it at that. Please ride safe, and we'll see you out there. Check, check, check. Check 1 2, check 1 2, check 1 2, check 1 2. Now, in closing.
All right. Damn it. All right, let's get. Oh shit, I stalled it.